Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the partner webinar from Cluster 7 on internal audit. For those of you who have not attended a partner webinar before, the aim of this session is not to educate on the topic per se, but actually to the involvement of Cluster 7 within that particular topic. Today's topic is indeed internal audit, and that in itself is very wide-ranging. As we all know, it is a series of processes, both from a compliance perspective, as well as looking at the books and undertaking all forms of auditing. We're not, of course, trying to cover that. What we are seeking to do is to focus the lens on the use of spreadsheets and Excel files within that internal audit process. You have a screen here full of spreadsheets. What most people do when they're conducting an audit is that they will look for the critical files. They will actually assess those critical files, and they probably get some form of sample. That sample, as depicted here by the yellow box, maybe 2%, 5% of the files in question. Certainly won't be 100%. We sort of ask ourselves why people don't actually audit 100% of those files. Typically, the answer would be time, cost, or resources. There just isn't the time to do that. So I pose this question: what happens if the red file depicted here was not part of the audit process, but was actually picked up, the internal audit process, but was picked up by the external audit? What happens if there was more than one? So our thesis today is really on how we are going to present how you could actually capture and perhaps manage not just the yellow area on this chart, indeed all the files on this chart, and control that. Again, if you've been on previous partner webinars, we use this acronym here, FAIM. And it stands for Find, Analyze, Inventory and Monitor. Let's look at the first of those. Part of the internal audit is to find the veritable needle in a haystack. And the question is, how do you find that needle in a haystack when you're trying to find critical Excel files within the whole process? Perhaps the easiest way is actually to burn down the haystack with some matches, and indeed that is the first analogy that we're going to run through, and we're going to come on to that shortly. You might want to be a little bit more laser focused and be very targeted of what you want to do, and we're going to show you how, using some of our cloud technology, we can do that. But you may also want to find where files are connected, where they're getting their feeds and information. And for those who know Cluster 7 well, we'll be using our spider map, our spider technology, to actually map some of that pieces out for you as well. On the find piece, we can actually scan tens of thousands, millions of files, and actually help determine via a profiling technique to find the files that are going to cause the most issue. It may be that they're poorly designed, that they actually use some curious things like parts of macros like stop statements and on next resume and things like that. And so we're trying to capture those as part of the process. An alternative is actually, as I said, to use this sort of laser focus. And this is something that we've seen a number of our business partners now adopting as part of the process. They're using our risk checks to look at hundreds of files and actually assess them for an internal audit process. So you'll see on this particular screen here that we're looking at internal audit files, and we're capturing what issues are arising from that and assigning some risk score. And we'll shortly show you how some of that is done. Where it has created a high risk score, we may want to drill down onto that in a little bit more detail and assess where those issues are arising, and actually whether we want to actually look at some of that stuff in more detail and actually discuss it with the client too. So rather than presenting it as screens, I'm going to hand across to Vivian, and Vivian's going to give you a demonstration of this.
Thanks, Tony. So, with the Cloud Spreadsheet Manager solution, we have two capabilities, and as Tony said with the internal audit side, risk checks enable you to understand and find those potentially risky files amongst a number of hundreds, thousands of files that might be critical to the business, and you want to look for more information and understand how that is potentially risky to the business. So with risk checks, you have a number of things we're able to pick up. Of course, we can tell you what the name of those files are and who's uploaded those files to the risk check. But we can also tell you how many macro rules there are that are broken within the file, data connections, workbook link rules, worksheet rules, named range rules, workbook rules, and cell rules, sorry. And with that, if you look here, you can see that we've created one profile with internal audit, and there's a couple number 2 and just a normal one. And it's highlighted that this specific file under this profile has come out as a high risk category. I suppose it's important to point out here that just because we're looking at one file that's potentially high risk, you can upload 20 files, 50 files, 100 files as you see fit. And then they'll get ranked into low, medium, and high. And from that, you can focus possibly on the medium files, but certainly on the high-risk files, to see where the ones that are likely to cause an issue during an audit process. And there probably is a further analysis that you might want to take on these files. So if I look at this one, and instead of downloading it, like all good demo, there's one already created. I can see here now that with this high-risk file, it tells me a few things on the screen, which is the risk check summary report that you'll get from all risk checks that you run in CSM. So from this, I can see that, first of all, the file was high risk, and it was run against internal audit number 2 for the risk check. And then it tells me a score breakdown and cell breakdown. Now with this, on the score breakdown, I can see which rules have been run, and then under the score, where it's 0.00, that rule's not broken. But for example, if you were to look at formulas with magic numbers, just here, this rule has scored quite highly at 3.82, which tells me that there's potentially quite a lot of cells that have some magic numbers. And for those of you that don't know Class 7, for us, magic numbers are hard-coded numbers at the end of a formula or inside a formula.
So if you're looking at this thing and saying this is an internal audit profile, this is a profile that we have created. You as a business partner can actually set up your own profiles in your own instance and determine what rules you want to have on looking for files that you feel will be worthy of more analysis during the internal audit process.
Thanks, Tony. So if we then look at cells breakdown, you can see that down here on the left are the number of worksheets within this file, and then it's telling me how many cells have values only, formulas, errors, and constants. And for example, again, we can look at statement final has 9 constants. So that's highlighting some potential issues that you might want to focus on and drill down and analyze. In able to do that, we have these drill down options where you can drill down to workbook summary, for example. And for now here, I can see that there's some very hidden worksheets, some macros that use on arrow resume next, and macro does not use option explicit. So for example, if I looked at macro users on arrow resume next, I can drill down to that, and it tells me exactly which module or macro that's in and what line that is as well. So I can then take this and, as an auditor, analyze that and potentially talk to my clients to understand why they've used on arrow resume next, and look at potentially remediating that and trying to fix that issue. I can then go back up to the risk check summary report, and from here I can also drill down to cell rule summary. So if we remember that we've got 9 constants on statement final, I'm now going to want to drill down to this and understand where those constants are. So I can remember statement final was there, and I've now got all of my statement final worksheet cells that had magic numbers in them. So I've filtered out just to look at the magic numbers, and say, for example, I wanted to look at I11, I can now see two things. So it's first of all telling me that there's a hard-coded number, and it's also telling me that there's been a hashtag div error in this as well. So this highlights a couple of things, and as an auditor, I'd want to potentially understand why this is showing up in this way. I suppose from here, it's important to note that if we looked at the risk check rules, and I was to drill down back to what rules have actually been run, as an auditor using the risk checks, you'd be able to choose which rules to run against certain files so that you can understand what's high risk, medium or low risk within these files. And you can change the weighting and the risk category. So there'll be certain things that you might want to focus on that you won't necessarily be able to find manually, or might take a bit longer. And this expedites the process in trying to understand the potential risks within a file or an audit process. I think at this point, I'll hand back to Tony.
Thank you, Vivian. So what we're going to do right now, as we follow on from that, Richard, is just take a quick poll on a couple of questions on this. So Vivian, do you want to just pose the first question on that for us?
Yeah.
So the question that should appear on your screens now is, what is the percentage of effort spent reviewing Excel files during an internal audit process? So think about the overall internal audit process, and what's your assessment on these four categories? And we'll give a few seconds for people to come back with the results. And the result has come back, and we're seeing that...
So we've got 5% are saying that there's 75% is Excel files during an audit process spent reviewing. And then the rest, we've got 70% saying 51 to 75, 0% saying 0 to 25, and then rest on 26 to 50%.
Let's have a look at the second poll as well, please, Vivian.
Yeah.
So the second poll says, if Excel files are part of an audit, how are these selected? So again, you'll see there's three responses for this, and it'd be interesting to hear how you came back with your responses here, please. Okay, so the responses that have come back in is that the client selected is actually 0. The random sampling is 80% and 20% is on automated. So thank you very much for taking part in this so far. Okay, so stepping on within our presentation, we're going to go on to the analysis phase. For those of you who know us well, we work on this, our favorite thing, our spider map, and actually look at how this provides us information about what's going on in the client. As you well know, the red areas are the ones that are high risk and the green areas are low risk. But if we look at this in a little bit more detail and drill down on this, it tells us actually a lot more information that from an internal audit process is quite valuable. For file 435, clearly links across to the next file over here, slightly off the page, 352, and indeed that links to a number of other files. So the two files marked red here are in themselves high risk, and actually we know because they have, in addition to that, because they have what we call a sloped shoulder to the file, they're not square, they actually have macros in them as well. So they may be worthy of some thought. You'll see that at the bottom that actually 696 is actually coming from a database file. So it's important that that link from 696 is actually kept constant. There's actually slightly to the left of the middle file 362, the red one, there are a number of 485 files. I think they're quite interesting in where they are, in that each of those files has no input. So that means it's having manual input that eventually is feeding back up this model. And again, there's something that people have to understand. How is that data getting into that file, and how is it affecting the overall model? So this is part of our Spider process. It's actually run on-premise, and it's actually something that captures a lot of information about the client and the client's estate during the process. So here's a modern-day view of that spider diagram, and we've recently upgraded this product, and we're very proud of what we've done here. As you can see, we're not just looking at spreadsheets, we're capturing all sorts of information here on databases and other file types. We're finding where files are found and indeed not found. So that is equally important. If a file ought to be there, we can show where that is. We can show where passwords are being used and perhaps restricting access. We're actually scoring this along the way as well, and this is the same as the risk profile piece that Vivian demonstrated earlier. Indeed, there are a whole bunch of metrics and statistics to go along this, and it's indeed a long list, and we're not going to work through all those today. At any point in the network, you can drill down and actually look at what's going on that particular hotspot, and the hotspot is marked as red because it's high risk, and actually identify what's going on there. At the end of the day, the part of this health check process is to do an inventory analysis report, and that inventory analysis enables a number of statistics and data being produced in about a 20-30 page report that you as a partner can package together as your own report and work out how you want to present that to the client with recommendations of how they should proceed. This is a chargeable process, but we will work with you to make that success, with you as the partner, as the front interface to the client on this project. So far, what we have done is we've actually looked at the complexity of the file. We're using a technical audit, using our tools, the risk check process, the Spider, the discovery, to determine whether the file is low, medium, or high. What that would mean is that, for example, if there were 1 million files in a client's network, and that is actually quite usual for this type of number sitting around, we would immediately determine that probably 900,000 of those were either very old, i.e. haven't been used in the last 6 or 12 months, that actually had no relevance to what was going on or had a very risk profile. So they would be discarded immediately. You might find that 95,000 of them are actually medium risk. They're interesting, but not of consequence. And actually, just 5,000 of them are of some high complexity or have some content that actually makes us concerned about them, and that we probably want to think about them more. To do that, we probably want to look at whether they're also material to the business, and this is whether they're low, medium, or high. And this comes on to the next part of our technology, the I. So inventory is actually looking at how we determine that materiality. We're trying to use, probably by using some form of policy about how your data is stored, your end user computing or your unstructured data, how it's stored, how it is determined whether it has changed in the last 3 months, 12 months, whatever the review period is, and whether those changes have been captured and actually commented within the inventory, so that when it comes up to audit, those high materiality, high criticality files have actually been captured. you would think initially that an inventory is a list of lists, and to some extent that's correct, but actually that's not what we're trying to cover here. We're trying to cover capturing a policy as an attestation process and making sure that all those material or critical processes within your EUC or unstructured data are actually capturing those files or those processes as you see fit. This helps us move not only up the complexity chart, but across the materiality chart. That was hard for me to say. And actually look at whether those files or processes are actually medium or high. And so we're seeing here that those that are medium and high, we actually made it want to monitor them for change. And actually that's what the last part of our technology, our monitoring, does. So why would we use monitoring? Let's get back to our visual model and this sheet here, where we already talked about we're really wanting to find the red files. So let's say we've now found the red files by doing our risk check process at the beginning. You may actually inspect those files and determine that they are high risk. But perhaps the next follow-on step is to naturally ask the client, could you give me the copies or versions of that files that you've had in the last year, or the last 2 years, or the last 3 years? And the client will naturally have those. It would be unusual if they didn't. What we can do within our process is then we can actually help identify those. And so this is part of what's here. We pick up those files that have been identified, we request the versions, and we're going to run this through our compare monitoring process to find, and indeed for us or you as the partner, to comment on the changes. So let's see how we do this, and I'm going to hand back again to Vivian to do that.
Thanks, Tony. So, as Tony said, we also have the option to monitor our files and understand what's changed within these files. So taking one version of a file and comparing it to the next. For example, in this internal audit container that I've uploaded some files to, you can see that I've got financials 2015, which is my base file. That's where I'm starting from, and I'm wanting to understand how the year-on-year files have changed. So financials 2016, financials 2017, and so on. I can see here that I've got a number of changes within, for example, financials 2016 compared to 2015. So again, similar to risk checks, I can see that at a high level there's been some macro changes and some VBA reference changes. There's not been any data connections, links, or worksheet changes, but there were some named ranges and some cell changes as well, and no workbook properties. I've also got the option to comment on the changes that have occurred within these files. So for an internal audit process, when you're reviewing files to understand those changes that have occurred, being able to comment on a specific change that's occurred within a file is quite key within the process, so that you can understand and talk to your colleagues and maybe your clients to understand why these changes have occurred. And with that, we provide a review and approval stage as well. So let's drill into this file and understand what those changes mean for this file. So I just zoom out slightly. So now I can see a number of things. I can see in a bit more detail that I've got, for macros, module 1.bas has had a change to it, and that we've added module 2.bas to the macro. We've also got 3 VBA reference changes, 6 named range changes, and then a number of cell changes from errors, adds, deletes, recalculations, and so on. So it's also key to point out that, like I mentioned with the commentary, similar to how Excel works, these corners tell me that there's some commentary that's been made. So for example, in macros, I can see that there's a query made if I hover over this corner. And same for named ranges, there was an issue raised. Where they're green, it means that these comments have been resolved. But where they're red, it means that there's still stuff to review and assess and go back and look at. If we drill down into the macro changes, we can now see module 1.bas that it picks up at a very high specific detail exactly what's changed within this macro. So we've got data has changed to new entry. But I think it's also important to highlight the fact that you can also pick up whether T12, for example, in range has changed from T12 to T14, if that had actually happened. And you can pick up whether there's been row adds, deletes, and it doesn't matter how large this macro is. If I hover over this, then again I can see that there's been a query made. And just to show you how it works in terms of the commentary thread, I've been able to raise this issue of why was this macro changed, and then if you were using this as an internal audit process with clients or even your colleagues, you could use this commentary thread to understand those specific changes and queries. If I then drill into the cell changes, I can see now, let's go to item data, for example, that there's been a number of changes that have occurred. So our solution does some clever smarts, and it picks up and identifies a range within this worksheet. So this worksheet has picked up this whole light green area is one range, and then where there's the dark green areas tells me that there's been some changes that have occurred within this worksheet. And the little red box is highlighting the cell that we're focusing on, and we can see that there's, for example, been a data added within cell A14. Now, as an initial view, I would look at this and think, okay, so there's probably been maybe some changes to some rows or columns, whether they're recalculations or some adds. But I can see in a bit more detail on the filter side that there have been one row added and a row deleted, and then a number of function and data changes and adds as well. Now, for example, the noise within the spreadsheet is quite a lot. There's a lot going on, and if I wanted to reduce that, I could get rid of the recalculated, because probably going to look at recalculated cells and understand why that's happened. But I'm now focusing on the fact that there's been a number of specific changes dotted around this worksheet, and again, 2 clear rows. So, for example, if I looked at the row that was deleted, it would tell me exactly where that is. I'm going to reset the filters and focus on the, for example, argument changed. And now, if I show the side-by-side view, this gives me a level of more detail to understand exactly what it looks like within that spreadsheet. So that's, you've got the left side is the previous spreadsheet, and the right side is the new spreadsheet and how that's changed. And again, you're able to highlight here the fact that it's been a function argument change, and it tells me at the percentage and exact figure how it's changed. And you can click through these changes as well, as so. If I then look at the review and approval stage within this comparison process, I can see that there's a number of comments having been made, like I've highlighted throughout this demo. But I'm able to see that where there's some queries, some issues, and documentation raised, and also that the fact that the review and approval stage has been completed. And I can filter out these threads as well. So if I was to click on unresolved threads, it highlights the fact that I've just got one query left to review. This is key for an internal audit process, because you're able to then provide this to the external auditors so that they can understand exactly what that process was, why there were changes in these files, and how they've been reviewed and approved and passed for the audit process. So I think from here, if I drill back up to the home page, you can see as a summary, the comparisons provides the changes over the ability to look at the changes over the past year, but also a comment and review process, and it documents ready for external audit. And this again expedites the process for an internal audit process and enables you to actually understand what's actually changed within these files quickly and smoothly without having to dig deep. Tony, have you got anything to add?
No, that's great. Thank you very much indeed, Vivian. Let's try and conclude the presentation.
Okay.
So we're going to do another quick poll again. Again, a couple of questions that we're going to pose to you, and we'll share those out as they come. So let's have the first of those questions, please, Vivian. In general, does the client have an effective end-user computing (EUC) policy in place? And what's the likelihood as a percentage is this to happening? So what this really means is when they're actually measuring and putting controls in place for internal audit or any other process, is there an EUC policy documented and how effective is it? Let's see what the feedback is on that. So we have the results back in. So a split field, 0 to 25% was 0. 25 to 50 is 80%, and 51 to 75 was 20%. So thank you very much for the responses there. Let's look at the second one, please, Vivian. So this is literally naturally a little bit biased towards cluster 7s here, but how does the auditor review files and or changes between the two versions of an Excel file today? Do they not do it at all? Is it a manual review? Do they use an in-house tool, or are they using a desktop third-party tool? So we're curious as to where that would be. So we'll give you a few seconds to answer that as well. Thank you very much. And the responses are that for not at all is 0%. For the manual review, it's 60%. For using an in-house tool is 20%, and indeed for using a desktop tool is also 20%. So again, thank you very much for those responses. To conclude on the presentation here is that we've talked about using internal review to identify the high-risk files as instead of an initial sampling process by doing a more of 100% sampling, and to look at versions of that to actually then ask the client to comment on the changes between the last year, for example. If you've convinced the client that that's a good idea, you can offer that as a self-monitoring service going forward on their core audit files. So it may be 10 or 20 files only that you need to do, which will create a reoccurring subscription model for you, which you can set up in a white labeled instance of Cluster 7. And you can also offer that with some review, consulting review, if you will, around that as part of the offering. If the client likes that piece, you can also encourage them to add more critical material files to service that's maybe not part of the audit process, maybe they should be, and actually create additional revenue on top of that, which helps you grow your footprint within the client. At the end of the day, we covered these 4 things. How to find the file, whether you're actually burning down the haystack, as we talked about earlier, whether you're using some laser focus by using our risk checks using the cloud, or whether you're just using our spider process, either to analyze the process, but also to discover more files and more things that may be causing an issue. We're using our inventory to help you determine the materiality of those files in addition to their complexity, so you're working on those that are core to the business. And then set up some form of monitoring process to manage those going forward as part of the internal audit review. Have we got any questions appeared? We don't appear to have any questions during the course of today. I hope that's been very interesting, everybody. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope that was a good and useful briefing on internal audit and how Cluster 7 might be able to help. Thank you for attending. Bye-bye.